Good afternoon and welcome to Keys to Minimizing Threat Alert to Remediation Time, a health system CIO media and production sponsored by ClearDATA. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Adam Zoller, CISO at Providence, Kim Alkire, System Director of Cyber Wellness and Acting CISO at Health First, and Chris Bowen, CISO and Founder at ClearDATA. And then we will have our Q&A. So let's jump right in. Kim, why don't you get us started? Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Kim. I am the System Director for Cyber Wellness at Health First. We are on the East Coast of Central Florida. We're an integrated delivery network, which means that we have a hospital system. We have 4 hospitals. We have a medical group, and we're also a payer. So that gives us some additional complexities that the typical hospital system might not be up against. In my role, I have responsibility for things, and this commonly found in the security teams, like information security. So the GRC policy stuff, that side of the house for me also includes disaster recovery and training and awareness. And then on the cybersecurity engineering side, the more technical side of the house as well, firewalls, EDR, identity and access management. So everything that encompasses the reduction of risk when it comes to technology kind of falls under my umbrella.
Very good. Thanks, Kim. Adam?
Hey, good morning. Adam Zoller. I'm the CISO of Providence. We're a hospital system on the West Coast. We have 50 plus hospitals, 1,000 plus clinics, a health plan, a high school, a college, about 125,000 full-time caregivers and another 100 plus thousand non-employed caregivers, so contractors, support staff. In my role, I lead traditional cybersecurity team, identity and access management, governance, risk and compliance, security ops and engineering, chief of staff function, which is our comms training and awareness, cyber strategy, budgeting, planning, that type of thing, and global office in Hyderabad, India for 24/7 follow the sun capabilities for things that demand it. Things like our SOC, our identity and access management operations, some governance functions, et cetera.
Excellent, Adam. Thank you. Chris?
Hi, my name's Chris Bowen. I'm the founder and the CISO at ClearDATA. ClearDATA creates, manages, and secures cloud systems that transmit or store or process PHI, protected health information, as you all know. And we do that with continuous compliance, managed detection and response, and state-of-the-art cloud operations. And my role is really, I'm a C-level executive that leads the security function, the risk function, much of the same things that Kim does, as well as compliance. We also have a managed detection and response team that falls within our services organization. And we're excited to talk to you today and share some of our thoughts around mean time to resolution.
Excellent. Very good. All right, Kim, let's start with you. Talk about the different ways your organization obtains threat intelligence.
Yeah, so we are big proponents, being healthcare, of the different ISACs. So HISAC, Health ISAC. We actually have one of my managers on an advisory council for HISAC. Get a lot of benefits out of that, including some intel data. A lot of times just the chatter that we hear in those threads could be the first time we hear a glimmer of a problem we need to be aware of with a vendor or one of our partners. But we also look to have integration with some of our key tools, like our SIM, our EDR, our firewalls with different sources. We have open source feeds in our SIM, which we use Devo. And we're actually working to build out some additional sources right now.
All right, very good. Adam?
Yeah, we use multiple sources to curate threat intel. So, as Kim mentioned, we're a member of the Health ISAC as well. I think from an ISAC perspective, there's a lot of organizations that participate in the ISACs. The threat intel tends to vary in quality and applicability to your organization. So I find that the ISAC details that you get, you have to kind of treat with a grain of salt or enrich yourself to make it relevant to your organization. We also subscribe to a number of commercial threat intel feeds. So I'm going to spit out some vendor names. I'm not endorsing any of these vendors, just for a caveat for everyone listening in. We're a CrowdStrike shop. CrowdStrike provides us threat intel as a part of their endpoint detection response platform and our subscription to them. We also ingest and process and subscribe to Recorded Futures threat intel feeds. We find that they do a good job of combing open source and then combining it with some closed sources and giving us a picture of the threat actors that target us, as well as vulnerabilities and also things like compromised accounts and credentials. We also curate and develop a lot of internal threat intelligence. What I mean by that is we ingest about 14 terabytes a day of telemetry across our ecosystem, and we enrich it by combining some of the atomic indicators of compromise, and things like pieces of malware that we find, some of the behaviors that we find with external sources like VirusTotal to get a picture of the threat actors that are targeting us, so that we can build our own picture of the actors and profile the actors that are targeting our organization and try to get in front of their attacks. What we find is that some of the commercial intel feeds and ISACs, they give you a picture of what's already happened. We're trying to get upstream in the kill chain. I think Jen Easterly likes to say left of boom, and I think that's really where we have to be as network defenders. In order to get there, we have to really look at not the delivery phase and later in the kill chain, but actually the weaponization phase and earlier, things like adversary reconnaissance, adversary weaponization. And in order to do that, again, you have to really comb your environment and enrich your own detail and come to your own conclusions.
Very good. Chris, your thoughts around threat intelligence. Adam, I don't know if ClearDATA provides threat intelligence. You can let us know that if that's something you do. If not, just your quick thoughts, because Adam mentioned, and Kim also mentioned, multiple sources. Obviously, you're going to get multiple sources of threat intelligence. Then it's still on you to somehow collate, right? I don't know if they have different individuals in charge with reviewing the streams from each of those sources, but at some point things have to come together into a dashboard or some kind of picture. So your thoughts there on threat intelligence?
Yeah, I think both said it well. Understanding the two categories of intelligence, if you will. You've got the internal intelligence, you've got the external intelligence. On the internal side, it's important to use what you've got in front of you. And in our case, we have about 10,000 or so active threat sensors that we've deployed into over 250 or so healthcare organizations that are our customers. And that gives us a tremendous amount of highly actionable intelligence in almost real time. Certainly we go through and talk about and learn proactive threat actor targeting and campaign tracking. One of the things I love about Australia, by the way, is they've actually gone out and said, we're going to start going after these cyber criminals proactively, and we're going to start taking them down. And the FBI's done some of that as well. So understanding who your threat actors are, both externally and internally, is important. Like everyone else here on this call, we also use federal and state agency information. We'll use information from CISA, DHS, NSA, FBI. HISAC is also a great source of information. Commercial relationships and partnerships, Anomaly Labs is a great one for us. We use Elastic Security Labs as well, and all 100 or so other open and closed source threat data feeds. You asked a little bit about who does what.
Mm-hmm.
We can kind of get into the organizational structure in a bit, but not everybody does everything. You kind of have to specialize, and you have to focus on areas where number one, you're interested in and it's fun for you, or you start to get tired of your job in security. But it's also important to to have an effective organization that leverages its talents, its skills, and its experience.
Very good. Okay, next question. How important is rapid time to remediation, this MTTR concept? How do you structure your teams and governance so you can move quickly to address threats when they are identified? I assume MTTR often deals with patching, but goes well beyond that. What are your thoughts? Adam, let's go with you first.
Yeah, I think I've seen this used in a few contexts. Of course, in the vulnerability management context, it could refer to your time to remediate patches. Oftentimes, what I see though is MTTR is one of the, I think, three or four phases of incident response. So, when a threat actor penetrates your environment, it's your mean time to detect is kicks off the investigation, and then you have mean time to contain, which is how quickly can you contain that breach of your organization, and then mean time to respond or mean time to remediate, which is how quickly can you close all the gaps in your environment to ensure the threat actor can't come back. And what I would say is, if you look at it in terms of incident response, mean time to remediate gets you to a place where I think you've remediated everything, and that's very important. But the most important phase of incident response, in my experience, has been mean time to contain, which is that second phase. Because I can detect things. If I can detect things relatively quickly and I can contain things relatively quickly, I can limit the risk exposure that my organization faces. And then I can kind of take a little bit of time to remediate, as long as I can ensure that at least the glaring gaps, the entry vector that the adversary used to get in is fixed. When it comes to vulnerability patching, though, certainly when it comes to zero-day vulnerabilities that are exploited in the wild, you need to remediate those very quickly. And we do capture metrics, scoring mechanisms around how quickly we can discover and how quickly we can remediate vulnerabilities. Again, especially zero-day vulnerabilities or unpatchable vulnerabilities that are being actively exploited in the wild. It gets tricky though, because as I mentioned, you can't oftentimes patch these vulnerabilities immediately, but sometimes you can put compensating controls in place or detections in place so that you can start to respond to the attacks that you face. The things that can be detected through a regular vulnerability scanner, best advice that I have is to prioritize those vulnerabilities that come off your vulnerability scanner and patch them in a risk forward fashion. So what are the most critical vulnerabilities that you're facing on internet facing systems with sensitive data on those systems or access to sensitive data? Patch those first, and then move on down the prioritization strata. So systems that may not be internet facing but have critical data, or are internet facing but don't have critical data. I mean, come up with a prioritization mechanism that works for your organization and patch them accordingly, and capture metrics to make sure that your teams, really your application owners, are following your security protocols.
Very good. Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree 100%. There's a lot of meat in this question. I guess I would add on to that is really around being able to gain efficiencies in each one of those little segments of time. Being able to get to that contained moment, that's where you can breathe again, to Adam's point. Like being able to restore back to normal from there, that's really where you kind of get your head back together. But those moments up to that point really are going to rely on thinking ahead and being prepared, standardizing your run books, automating as much of those things as you can to be able to act on that intelligence that you get when you have that detect moment. Making sure that not only do you have those, have them documented, have them accessible, exercise them so they're, that muscle memory is there for your team so that they don't have to dig out checklists and things to try to figure out what to do next.
Very good, Chris.
I liken the comments from Kim. As you're thinking about practice, you think about my Cardinals. They've had a tough season this year, and the same would be true for any kind of security team, any managed defense or detection and response team, to try to figure out, to Kim's point, to try to figure out how to respond if you never practice the play. So you never want to practice the play on the football field the first time. You got to practice, practice, practice. So I fully endorse everything that both Adam and Kim just said. Having as well, your designated response roles. Who's the kicker, if you will? Who's going to snap the ball? Those kinds of roles. Taking it to the cybersecurity, metaphor, if you will. Making sure that you have a plan. You don't just call a play and everybody says let's go just run how we want to. You got to have a plan. Who's supposed to do what? Who needs to buckle down and do this? The threat intelligence integration is important, but so as well is the communication protocols. We just had a breach simulation, with our senior leadership team just a couple of weeks ago, and one of the most important parts that we discovered in the MTTR space was communication protocols. Who's supposed to talk to whom? What should they say? When should they say it? How do you govern around the chatter that happens within a company? How do you regulate the social media posts that will inevitably pop out there, and then of course your post-incident analysis. There's a lot of different considerations when it comes to getting into the trenches and actually responding to these events. I don't know if that didn't directly answer the question, but we were talking about organizational structure and who does what, and just having all of these things defined is very important.
I'd like to jump in there actually and follow that tangent a little bit, Chris. Breach simulations, especially for the group that you just mentioned, your executive management, it might not always be front of mind, top of mind for them. So one of the things that we found to be really valuable as a takeaway from our most recent executive tabletop was the discussion with them around just enabling our responders to make timely decisions, knowing that we might be negatively impacting the business temporarily, right? Ransomware is the thing. It's still the thing. It's the name they know. It's what they're scared of. It's quite possible that if we had a sniff on something that might be turning into ransomware in our environment, we're going to cut some limbs off in order to protect them, right? So being able to have those discussions so that it's not a surprise in the moment, I felt was really valuable. And also then that got them thinking about those communications. What would that look like? What would those talking points be to the business to be able to explain to them that we were acting proactively in such a scenario? Really, really valuable stuff there. If you haven't done one of those, I highly suggest it.
They're actually kind of fun. We did ours on Halloween, and our facilitator dressed up like Anonymous. It was really quite fun. But to your point, they're speaking of taking off limbs to protect the organization, there's a couple of things you got to think about. One is if you're a hospital, and you're going to turn something off, what's that going to do to your patient care, your patient safety? So you've got security implications as well as operational resilience considerations, cost efficiency, user satisfaction, and then of course if you're working in the GDPR world, you got 72 hours to solve everything. Just 72 hours. So
and 4 days if you're publicly traded now.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it seems like this, we've slid easily into a conversation about business continuity planning, disaster recovery, tabletops, and things like that. Adam, is this all on a continuum? So this idea of, containing, isolating these threats, when you get intelligence, you need to act on it. It slid so easily into this other conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really all about practice, right? It's all about when you have some sort of situation where it's a crisis-like situation and you need speed, that requires practice. So that's where there's some similarity here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And actually, I think maybe I've shared this quote on previous webinars for Health System CIO, but I use this with non-technical staff that I talk to quite a bit. And that's the Mike Tyson quote of everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that really plays out in cyber incidents too. The best laid plans, every cyber incident is very different. And so if you think you're going to pull a plan off the shelf and follow the step-by-step checkbox or checklist, like a pilot starting an airplane or getting ready to take off, that's just flat out wrong. I'd say, to the points that Chris and Kim brought up, practice is your best friend. Do cyber incident exercises with all levels, board level, executive level, practitioner level, frontline manager level, and operational exercises with tactical, technical injects, all the way up to the strategic level exercises with very strategy level injects that get your executives and your board in the mindset of the types of decisions that they're going to have to make during an incident. Because as Kim mentioned, and as Chris alluded to, you're going to have to make these calls, these very difficult calls, potentially to virtually isolate branches of your business and potentially impact the ability to do business or to provide patient care in some cases during the heat of the incident. And letting those individuals know the types of decisions that you need to be empowered to make as a security leader and the potential implications downstream, again, incredibly important, as well as having conversations around, how do you engage with law enforcement and provide technical details to law enforcement during the heat of an incident. You don't want to have to vet every piece of technical detail that you provide to law enforcement through legal. It's going to add lots and lots and lots of cycle times to information sharing when, every second matters. So yeah, absolutely. Testing is critically important. You mentioned disaster recovery planning. Having disaster recovery planning as a part of your cybersecurity program, we align ours to governance, risk, and compliance. Because it really is, it's an exercise in developing written disaster recovery plans, but also conducting exercises to those disaster recovery plans to make sure that you can fail over if a system goes unavailable for a period of time. So that's absolutely important as well. And then lastly, what I'd say is developing relationships with your clinical staff on the floor. So people like your nurse managers, house managers, people that, clinical leaders, physician leaders, develop those relationships ahead of time so that when you do need to communicate out that something's going to be impacted, or, for example, you have to go to downtime procedures because a system needs to be rebuilt, or a biomedical device needs to be taken offline because it was infected with something. Having those relationships ahead of time and knowing who to call and testing that out ahead of time so they are aware that this could happen and to expect these types of calls is going to save you a ton of time and heartache during an incident.
Now, Adam, were you talking about building relationships with clinicians? Are we talking sort of leadership to leadership? So someone like yourself dealing with the CMIO, or the chief medical officer, or are you getting more actually onto the front lines and speaking with the average physicians? And I mean, to what level would you recommend CISOs get to know people on the clinical side?
You have to do both to a certain degree. At the executive level, I think you're going to have more and deeper probably interactions, just by the nature of the role and the types of people, the types of processes that you're going to be setting up. Your incident response teams are certainly going to be interacting with people on the front lines, nurse managers, individual clinicians, in some cases, individual doctors, performing procedures that may have to wait because a device became impacted. So I'd say as a CISO, all levels are important. You're going to go deeper with the executive levels and management levels. But, I do hospital tours and I sit down with nurse managers. I go out and meet individual nurses. They walk me through their processes. I talk about what could potentially happen during a cyber event. We've even done exercises down at the individual hospital level where we'll work with nursing staff on the floor and say, hey, you're going to downtime procedures. The exercise index says, ransomware is impacting this hospital. You have to go to downtime procedures. And without going into the technical details of the incident response, it's more of a process-driven incident response exercise with those nursing people on the floor to say, now, how would you do paper charting for the patients that you have to provide care for? And you find some really interesting nuggets and facts about how an individual hospital works. And it's really about planting the seed in those clinicians' minds that, hey, these types of things are within the realm of possibility. And I need to be thinking about, how would I revert to paper? People don't really think about that until it has to happen, right?
No, and I think it's Kim, I think the initial reaction is probably, well, we're going to go to lunch and hope that by the time we get back from lunch that you've got the
Yeah.
systems back up. I literally believe that's the case. But then if you talk about injects, right? And then if you inject the concept of, well, in this scenario, you're going to be down for 2 weeks and we're not canceling everything and giving you paid time off. So how are you going to keep working? So just Kim, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point when you start to look at the extended downtimes. It's bad enough now. We've been, living digitally for so long. Yeah, a downtime now is not what it was 10 years ago, where clinicians were more comfortable with paper. It's more of a culture shock now than it ever was when you have to go into your downtime procedures unless they are well exercised. And many health systems do have redundant systems to provide a subset of information electronically, even during a downtime. You'll have maybe a server with some very important critical information for each hospital that they can still access, even if there's no internet connectivity, for example. But the thing is, once it stops receiving information from your source systems, that information ages and becomes almost dangerous, right? Because you don't know how relevant it is in that patient care situation anymore. So when you start looking at an extended downtime beyond the 4 8 hour mark, you really are going to be relying strictly on those downtime procedures in those clinical areas, and being able to relay that information to the business before you're in that scenario is really important so that they have adequate time to prepare and update their processes and know exactly what to expect. Because unfortunately, in our world, it's life and death if they aren't successful in making that transition.
Chris, your business is about helping people stay up, right? About providing security, helping the system stay up. So many of these conversations, bleed over into downtime and things like
Mhm.
that. Do you play in that area? Do you have conversations? Does that come up with your customers a lot?
Oh,
And
sure.
what do you see people doing that resonates when you're looking at a customer? And I'm sure you've been in shops where you look around and you go, you guys, you got a lot of work to do. God forbid something happened here today. This wouldn't be good.
Well, we operate more in the cloud than in an on-premises situation, but I remember those days of walking through a data center and saying, "What's happening here?" But if you think about some of the things that we're talking about from a disaster recovery or resiliency perspective, I don't know how many of you have just gone through your cyber insurance renewals. Uh, that's always a fun period of time in our lives. And what I was kind of shocked by the fact that, as much as of a pounding healthcare took over the past couple of years from a ransomware perspective, we're starting to realize that disaster recovery, business continuity, all of that stuff is really, really important, and we're starting to do more of it more effectively. And so some of the rates are actually coming down from a cyber liability perspective because healthcare is finally starting to understand that if they have a place to restore something to and something to restore, then they can bypass some of the pain that they could see. So I think it's really important to, again, practice your resiliency, to make it a part of your culture. So that's resonating to me. It's nice to see healthcare start to prepare in the ways that they need to, versus being caught flat-footed in the past. Just some thoughts of mine.
Very good. Excellent. All right. You mentioned cloud. So let's move to that. Talk about MTTR as it specifically pertains to cloud workloads. Are they made more difficult to address rapidly than in-house threats that maybe more under your control? Adam, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to the cloud, we have a tremendous opportunity to, certainly modernize really rapidly in healthcare and adopt some industry leading tool sets at the same time. I guess not mutually exclusive thoughts, but, um, you know, in my experience, responding in the cloud, restoring in the cloud, operating in the cloud is not only much easier, but much quicker, especially when it pertains to resolving an incident, certainly when as it pertains to containing incidents. I'd say largely, if we're talking mean time to respond or mean time to remediate, sorry, in uh, uh, within the cloud to cyber incidents, we use a lot of the same cybersecurity tool suites in the cloud that we use on-prem. And I'd say, the reason why we do that is simply for ease of use, ease of training, and simplicity of the environment, and just, having one single operating plane for our operators. Within the cloud, though, depending on which cloud provider you use, we're primarily Azure shop. AWS has very similar tool suites, but you have a ton of tools at your disposal when as it pertains to visibility, manageability, usability. Certainly, account management's much easier. You don't, in a lot of cases, you don't have a lot of the legacy technical debt and baggage that comes along with operating in an on-premise data center, especially within healthcare. I find that there's a lot of legacy technical debt that we've been, very laser focused on at Providence, and that slows down your mean time to resolve. So, I'd say within the cloud, it tends to be much simpler. It tends to be much quicker. I really prefer to operate within the cloud. I think the tools make your life a lot easier.
Great. Chris, your thoughts?
There's a couple of considerations here when you think about resiliency in the cloud. You've got a lot of dependency on your service providers. So you mentioned the Azure shop in the cloud, Adam. That's one that's fairly mature and probably very commonly used by most providers, is what we're seeing. But you also have this thing called that shared responsibility model. And if you haven't dusted that thing off from your contracts with your cloud service provider or the intermediary, like a ClearDATA, where we're managing the infrastructure for a provider, for example, understanding who's supposed to do what, you really should have some consideration around that. One of the other challenges that we've seen in the past decade is scalability challenges. Sometimes an incident may scale quicker than you had anticipated. Maybe there's some malware that is being used to mine for Bitcoin or some other thing. We've seen organizations just rack up hundreds of thousands of dollars when they're trying to do it themselves, and they miss something, and all of a sudden they've got this huge cloud bill because of the scalability issue associated with the vulnerability. Sometimes you've got some network complexity to think about. You've got automation opportunities. Adam, you said, it can be more automated, if you will. It's a lot easier to deploy a CloudFormation template or a Terraform template quickly to fix something and address it across a fleet of 10,000 assets or whatever you're trying to do. And then, of course, you've got the worldwide scale of the cloud. So depending on where your cloud data or your PHI is, helping to understand where it is first the first challenge that you have to think about. Where is it? Is it in a locality that it's supposed to be in? And can I get a handle on my cloud workload, or has Shadow IT kind of gone off the track and done their own thing, and you may not have full visibility? So those kinds of considerations, the compliance, the legal considerations, are also certain things that can make it a little bit more complex, if you will.
Very good. Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, talking about your own workloads in the cloud is kind of been what you guys were focused on. But Chris, when you talked about the shared responsibility model, that's something that I often look at in our third-party risk management as well, right? So our SaaS applications that are, the cloud is just somebody else's data center. It's so how good are they at securing and holding up their end of that bargain? Really understanding, doing that vetting of those third parties, especially if they're going to have direct connectivity into your environment. Really knowing, understanding, and documenting all of those connections for those third party folks, I would say is equally important when we're talking about cloud security for this MTTR discussion. Absolutely, big stuff.
All right, let's stick with you, Kim. What role can and do managed cyber services play for today's health systems dealing with talent or staffing shortages?
Yeah, show of hands, who has all of the talent that they need to do everything on all of the teams right now? Probably not too many people raising their hands. I think when we're looking at specific skill sets you're going to have to supplement sometimes. So identifying where you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck is really key here. Around managed cyber services, a lot of folks will outsource their sort of core operations. They might be doing some things with threat intel, as Adam said earlier. I hate to throw names out there of vendors that we use, but we are also a CrowdStrike shop. And we do have Overwatch. So with the topic being threat intel and threat hunting, we do have a reliance on them to do some of that work that's not done by one of my necessarily frontline engineers. And exercising that it is important too, to make sure that they're effectively coming to the table and identifying things that are going maybe a little bit sour in your environment. I think to tie in the cyber insurance question as well, that's been a question that I've been asked the last couple of years is, are you using a third party to supplement your team? How are you covering 24/7 services to make sure that you've got, a hands-on keyboard and you're ready to act in the event that you're needed to? And that's kind of been nudged in the direction of an expectation there. So we do have a 24/7 manned NOC SOC configuration for us, but we're always reevaluating what kind of supplement we might be needing to do to just keep those efficiencies in play.
Very good. Adam, your thoughts?
I think it's the age-old question of build versus buy. Depending on the size of your organization, it may make sense to build certain services in-house because you need the specific focus and tailorability, I suppose, for the service for your internal customers, and the ability to scale as well, depending on the size of the managed service provider or what service you're looking at outsourcing. The ability to scale can become challenging. I've had great experiences in past roles with managed service providers, and I've had really poor experiences with managed service providers. And what I find with managed service providers in general is they have to serve all of their clients. So you're never going to get the level of control or tailorability with a managed service provider that you would by building your capability in-house. That said, the point around talent and staffing really comes into play. If you're unable to attract the right level of talent or the level of talent that you need within the geographies that you operate, or you have high turnover, maybe it does make sense to hold a managed service provider accountable to operating to service level agreements versus trying to manage that team internally. It's Providence's size and scale. We tend to build things and operate internally ourselves, just simply because, again, scalability becomes a real concern. The tailorability of the services become a real concern, and the complexity of the business is a real concern when it comes to managed service providers. And there's not a ton of managed service providers, bar the very large operators that can scale to Providence's volumes. I mentioned that we're ingesting and processing 14 terabytes a day of telemetry in-house just for our cybersecurity incident response capability. That doesn't count any of the other telemetry that we use for system diagnostics and IT incident response. It's not, I guess, the full universe of data at our fingertips, and we're growing that every day. And again, because we operate a university, a high school, we're PCI in scope, we're HIPAA in scope, we're operating internationally. There's not a ton of service providers that can operate with the level of agility and flexibility that we need within all of those different lines of the road. One last item that I would note on managed service providers is around commodity plays. I do believe that there are some services in cybersecurity that are commodity services nowadays. Things like, I'll just use the example of, since Kim brought up third-party risk, sending out vendor questionnaires for vendors to fill out, and then getting those questionnaires back in response and doing some basic level of risk triage on those questionnaires. That's a real commodity service, and we're actually looking at, should we be doing that internally ourselves, or should we refocus our risk analysts on higher level of order, higher risk items for our organization, like doing in-depth risk analysis and driving movement within the business to address those risks.
Very good, Chris. So Adam mentioned he's had good experiences and bad experiences. So what do you do to make sure that your customers have good experiences and you're on that side of the ledger?
Well, I think it's managing expectations up front, and then it's fulfilling your brand promise. It's like any other service offering, you have to do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it, and you have to
Hmm.
be held accountable. And you really need to understand what, I mean, we focus purely on healthcare. And there's a reason we only focus on healthcare, because healthcare is just different enough that you can't be, a generalist. We have discovered and be successful in understanding, the the connectivity that has to happen within health systems, the nuances with deprecated ciphers like a TLS 1.0 or something still in use because some piece of software doesn't allow it somewhere else. And so what kind of compensating controls? I think, Adam, you mentioned some of that earlier in terms of some compensating controls. But it's really just doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's innovating as you go. It's leveraging new methods, new technologies in a way that's safe, and that we make sure that our customers can operate in a safe way. AI is one of those big examples right now. And how do we use that within the bounds of HIPAA compliance, both the privacy rule, the security rule, all the rules, the breach notification rule, and how do you do so in a way that allows you to experiment and understand what you can do? So anyway, there's just a lot of different things that we think about every single day to try to make it better for our customers in the healthcare space.
Kim, any thoughts on those arrangements? And it's funny. People have spoken in the past that a lot of times when there's dissatisfaction, the individual, the executive, the CIO or the CISO who's you're having the discussion with, if they're unhappy, it's something they inherited, right? I came in and there was this arrangement. Nobody's ever happy with an arrangement they walked into.
What they-
It's always right. It's always like, oh my God, I can't believe it, right? Well, somebody was doing their best when they came up with that, theoretically. But any thoughts there on sort of structuring these things for success?
well, I guess to hit that point, as well as the brand promise that Chris was just speaking of, I think one of the things that I look at when I'm looking for a partnership with a vendor of any kind, whether it's for a project or a longer term partnership to supplement whatever is going on, you really have to be able to bond and understand what you're getting out of that vendor. They have to operate as an extension of your team. They really need to understand your environment and your expectations and be able to do some of that beyond the commodity services that Adam spoke to. You have to have some longevity, and turnover matters, right? Am I going to have a different guy every time I call? Those types of things. When you have somebody that you can call and reliably get that information, that help when you need it, I think that matters just as much sometimes as the metrics and the SLAs that we build into a contract, because that's really where the longevity is in a relationship between two vendors, two partners.
Adam, anything you want to add there in terms of things that, I said,
Yeah.
you mentioned that sometimes not everything's going to work out with you guys because you're so big, but when you are going to get into something,
Yeah.
where and listen, you want your partner to be successful, right?
Yeah,
Because you don't achieve
absolutely.
anything if you drive so hard a deal that it hurts them. So that's something people mention sometimes.
Yeah, the partnership certainly is very important. I think Kim brought up a great point that the support model needs to be on point as well. If I have to wait hours on an incident response bridge to get help from one of my managed service partners, then it's just not going to work. And I am committed to partnering with our third-party providers on their services and ensuring that they can be successful as well as we can be successful. And I feel like we try to be as reasonable as possible in some of the interactions. But in the past, your question around people tend to be not as happy with inherited services as
Mm.
they are with services that they get to pick and choose. There's some level of I guess personal psychology that comes into play with that, and I can't really comment on that. But What I will say is, if I step into an organization, and this has happened to me in the past, and I look at, say, a 24/7 SOC managed service, which is supplementing our incident response internal capability, and I look at the managed service for the SOC, and it doesn't meet industry standards, basic industry standards for what a SOC needs to be doing, and the level of attention that a SOC needs to be paying to individual alerts that came in within the last 24 hours. As a practitioner myself who grew up in a SOC, I'm going to sniff that out really fast, and I'm going to take action on that very quickly. So yeah, I mean, I'm committed to, again, ensuring that our managed service providers can see success in what they do, because they're a partner of ours, and I'm relying on them for a critical service. At the same time, if the level of attention and service isn't there, that's going to get sniffed out really
Yeah.
quickly by people like Kim and I, and we're going to make changes.
Absolutely. When you
Yeah.
know your business, it's easy to spot. You look at something and you go,
Yeah.
this is just ridiculous. This is not industry standard. Let's go to my favorite section, ask a co-panelist. Chris, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask one or both of your co-panelists.
Okay, well, all right. I love that. So Adam, tell me, if you would, the craziest incident that you guys have had to fight.
Oh man, how much time do we have? Yeah, when I was a government employee, I was on point for Homeland Security for the RSA breach. That was interesting. A while back. When I was the CERT leader for Booz Allen Hamilton, I was the incident response leader internally for the Edward Snowden case, which was also a really interesting case.
Wow.
And then that was probably the craziest one because of all the externalities involved. I mean, it was like, where's Edward today? He's in China, and then he's in Russia, and it's like, okay. And then, the government it knocks on your door and says, hey, we're here to help. And, all these things. So that was an interesting case. Yeah, and then the types of fraud that you see in the payment card industry are just fascinating. We were able to uncover a massive fraud ring operating in the Midwest using cybersecurity telemetry across our payment card systems. And so when I was at GE's Capital's retail unit, so that was a really fascinating case, and it spoke to, I guess, the convergence of fraud, cybersecurity, and physical security, and the partnerships with external providers. And then in healthcare, of course, we see I think the most targeted attacks and some really nasty stuff. But I'd say as an industry, the healthcare providers themselves, and I think some of the more mature third parties in the space are actually doing fairly well nowadays. But there's still onesie, twosie, small mom and pop shops providing services to healthcare providers, and we see these things get popped every week. And some of the failure modes are just head scratchers, and in some cases it's very impactful for the healthcare system's ability to operate. So yeah, I mean, some fascinating cases. I guess long answer, I'd say probably the Snowden case. That was interesting.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
we gotta have a webinar just on that one.
oh, I love it. I love it. I
Yeah.
was going to say, I can't wait to see Adam interviewed in some kind of Netflix special, but maybe we'll just do it here.
No.
We'll do it ourselves.
Yeah, no desire. I'm going to stay on healthsystemCIO.
Oh, I love it. Love
Yeah.
it. It's a good choice. That's a
Yeah.
good choice. Kim, do you have a question for one? Oh, go ahead.
I do. Yeah,
Go ahead.
I've got a question for Adam.
Yeah.
One of your very first responses today was about internal telemetry with the threat intel, and that really piqued my interest. So we've got one of the newer platforms now from CrowdStrike around identity protection, and when I look
Yeah.
in that console, I just see so much information that we haven't quite figured out how to pull that value out of there. So I'm really interested in what you've done, how you identified where to kind of start with that telemetry specifically on your internal users.
Yeah, we're not a Falcon Identity customer yet, and we're looking at a couple other competing solutions. I know Microsoft has a solution in that space as well.
Yeah.
It is a need, and actually it's a pretty cool capability from what I've seen. The ability to push MFA out to any system, even if it doesn't support it, which is fantastic. So I can't speak to that particular subset of the CrowdStrike platform. What I will say is on So I'll give you an example. I mentioned virus total. So what we're doing is tracking threat actors in the weaponization phase of the kill chain, who are targeting us. The way that we're doing that is we're capturing telemetry on inbound emails, for example, and using detonations on malicious files to pull out intelligence, and then run it against virus total to say not only what are the specific hits on this piece of malware or the specific pieces of intelligence within the piece of malware, but what can we pivot on within those individual pieces of intelligence to find other pieces of malware that are being used to target other hospital systems, or potentially find, using actor tracking methods, specific actors building other toolkits or other pieces of malware that we can then download out of the system and then detonate ourselves, and then expand our knowledge and visibility of that actor's entire tool suite versus just the one that got sent to us. And that's just one example. I mean, there's tons of other examples about, looking for patterns of behaviors in your organization around the identity arena, using things like conditional access to inform your proactive detections and proactive protections. So tons and tons of, I guess, opportunities in the intel space. It's really just a matter of, how would you attack yourself? And then what are the types of things you need to look for to find those attacks?
Yeah, really nice. That's actually why we brought in that. It's funny that you hit on MFA to begin with for that solution. That was one of our leading reasons to look into that platform.
Very cool. Adam, we have a few minutes left. Do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Yeah, I guess I'd pose the same question back to you, Kim. I mean, from a intel and incident response standpoint, I guess number one, how are you thinking about global operations for your incident response, or not global operations, but like 24/7 operations, or global? I mean, but how are you operating in a 24/7 fashion, understanding these actors never sleep? And when you have an incident, like, how do you scale into those incidents and operate in a way that doesn't burn people out?
Yeah, we're not as big as you. So we're not global, but we do still have to, right? We're a hospital. We don't shut down either. We have to have somebody kind of manning the systems all the time. And right now we've got a little bit of a hybrid, and we're evaluating if we do need some more help. Our knock sock kind of combination, we've just made some org changes actually to integrate the SOC folks more on the infrastructure side, which has given them additional pieces and tools, visibility that they didn't have before in our sort of build versus run model. That they've kind of been in a silo previously. So kind of joining in there gives us, it's just a wealth of information that we didn't have before. It's definitely opened up our eyes. And we are really just looking now to see what is that expectation from a risk perspective for us to be able to do more than have our frontline folks who are doing that initial triage pass it to an engineer who's on call. Do we need to be doing more? I think there's a lot of people, a lot of peers that I've spoken to are going through similar conversations now. Again, I think coming out of COVID, there's a lot of people who are reevaluating their staffing models and where they're supplementing, being able to pull additional resources from further geographic areas, implementing something like a follow the sun model, right, where that's possible, even with your internal staffing.
All right, very good. We have time for final thoughts. Chris, I want to start with you. You could either go with sort of the general overview of what our webinar was today, or we've hit on a lot of issues today, but your final best piece of advice for the folks at hospitals and health systems. We got some different size, Kim's got 4 hospitals, Adam has 50. Health systems, vary in size. You got a 25-bed critical access hospitals, and you've got up there an Adam's size. So wherever you want to, whatever wisdom you want to drop on our folks today as we finish up.
Well, I don't know how earth-shaking this bit of advice would be, but for those of you who are manning the stations, guarding the galaxy, if you will, focus on the basics. Focus, a lot of times we think about the grandiose, big shiny thing that you can deploy or whatever, and those are great, but focusing on cyber hygiene, the blocking and tackling every single day of, making sure that you hit your marks, make sure that you understand what needs to be patched, what doesn't. End of life is a big issue. Think about that. There was just a New York Attorney General who fined US Radiology at 450 grand for using outdated hardware. One of those interesting cases. So again, I think it's just blocking and tackling, doing the things that you need to do, and aligning that to a risk-based approach that Kim has talked about extensively in this webinar. So grateful for both Adam and Kim for your dedication in healthcare. We actually share the same mission, the same values of trying to protect healthcare so that our patients can live and survive these times of cyber attacks, and everybody can thrive. So thank you for your service, if you will.
And great practical advice there, Chris. Kim, your final, and the way I would frame it up for you would be somewhat at a comparable sized health system. So someone in your position at a comparable sized health system, what's your best piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would go along the same lines as what Chris said. I think we didn't speak too much to even compensating controls today, but the speed to resolving an issue, if you're dealing with something, is obviously really important. But making sure that you're doing those basics, being brilliant at the basics, having your MFA, making sure that people can't exfiltrate easily. Those things done ahead of time before you're in the heat of a moment in an incident are really going to pay back in dividends. So things that may be introducing friction might be worth another look at, and also just being mindful of your overall exposure.
Excellent, Kim. Adam, we'll give you the last word. That was some pretty wild stuff you were talking about before. Yeah. That was like pretty cool.
It's been an interesting ride for sure.
Yeah. It sounds like you get to have some real fun over there. But anyway, go ahead. Your best piece of advice.
I love what Chris and Kim said, focusing on the basics. Well, really two things for me. Focusing on the basics, number one, because no fancy AI tool is going to help you with your attack surface. I mean, with the basics on your attack surface, or the basics around how you manage privilege in your environment. And those are the types of things that lead to breaches, not a lack of a fancy AI tool. So yeah, focus on the basics, number one. And then number two, we started off with mean time to resolve. So I'll say from an incident response standpoint, focus on your ability to detect and contain. I'd say those are the things that, again, lead to the most negative outcomes in organizations when you're facing incidents. Is number one, your ability to detect. So have your eyes and ears, if you will, in every place of your organization, every place of your information ecosystem, because your lack of coverage in one system is gonna hurt you. And then your containment is largely process driven. So again, test it while you're not under fire, so that when you are under fire, you know what to do and you know who to call, and they know what to do as well.
Excellent. Wonderful. Great chat. That's about all we had time for today regarding continuing education. You could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to work with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank our tremendous and wonderful panel, Kim Alkire, Adam Zoller, and Chris Bowen. I want to thank ClearDATA for making this event possible, and you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks.